In this course, you're going to learn everything you need to know about developing your own grant proposals. I will also talk to you about what the funders are looking for and how to make that proposal competitive or stand out. Developing grants can be overwhelming. To make this process simple, I have divided it up into three sections: grant writing, grant research, and grant submission. There is a project life cycle for a grant, and every project life cycle, no matter what type of organization you have, is nearly the same. You're going to find funding, then develop the proposal. You will route and submit the proposal. If you're a small organization, then the routing would just consist of your review or the board review. Larger organizations, they may have a little bit more details in their process. Then, once you receive the funding, you will set up your project with your project manager. Sometimes that will be yourself. You will manage the project and also during that time give the reports or whatever is necessary to your funder and then close out the project for that particular grant. So let's start learning about how to write your grant. The format I use in developing grant proposals for smaller organizations is called State My Case grant writing. You may hear this coined as a boilerplate template. This is not the same process that we use to develop grants. It's similar in that we do use one proposal, and from that proposal, we develop multiple grants, but there is a reason behind doing it this way for startup nonprofits. And you will learn more about that in the next slides. So let's take a look at the State My Case process. A lot of you may already be familiar with the strategic plan, and you also have heard or may be a little familiar with the grant proposal. Many nonprofits make the mistake of acting for a good cause without a written plan. It's very dangerous to chase grants. The program never melds together, and you're always chasing after the next opportunity to make your program work. So it's going to make your life stressful. It's going to put a lot of strain on your program, and you just don't want to do that. So, what I do and all of the consultants that work with me, we have created the State My Case process, and that is a strategic plan outline that mimics the grant proposal. So not only will you be using this proposal to secure funding, but you will also use this proposal to guide your organization. Let's take a look at the different components of the strategic plan. You have your mission statement, vision statement, core values, SWOT analysis, which is your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, your goals, action plan and strategies, and budget. Looking at the grant proposal, most funders are going to ask you for your mission statement, your vision statement. They will also want to know your purpose, organizational capacity, which is the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for growth for your organization, goals, objectives, and strategies, which is also similar to your action plan strategies, and your budget. So, as you can see, the strategic plan and the grant proposal go hand in hand. Therefore, any grant that is outside of the plan, we will not go for that particular opportunity. Now, let's take a look at the components of a grant proposal. Here are the components of a grant proposal. The majority of the grants you write will have at least 8 components. That is your purpose, organizational capacity, the needs statement, program design, goals and objectives, sustainability plan, budget, and attachments. We will break down each of these components and I will teach you how to write every section. I would also like to tell you that in addition to this course, we also have consulting available called Ask a Grant Writer. You will have the opportunity to email your drafts to a professional grant writer that is retired or has at least 10 or more years of experience. That grant writer will provide feedback on what you could do to make the application stronger, and they may even write some of the components in for you. This is a lot less expensive than hiring a full-time grant writer. So let's start with the first component in the grant proposal, and that is your purpose, mission, and vision. Your mission and vision clarifies who you are by describing the needs of your organization and what your organization was created to fill. Your mission statement is basically your change the world statement. It's a perfect world statement that's easy to remember. A great mission statement is to empower youth to meet their full potential. This is something that's easy for your board to remember, your staff to remember, and it simply states what you're going to do as an organization. Now, your vision statement is your long term future goals. For example, youth who are mentally, and physically healthy. So, if your mission is to empower youth to meet their full potential, one way to do that is to create programs for youth who are mentally and physically healthy. So, as you can see, your long term future goals are going to drive what programs you offer. Now, let's talk about the need statement. I'll tell you a little story. The reason why I started this course is because of my experience with working with a small nonprofit organization. That nonprofit organization reached out to me. I was working full time at the time, and they reached out to me to look at their grant because they had paid all of this money to a grant writer, and they couldn't afford to hire anyone else. And so I told them I'd be more than happy to look at it. I was working full time at the time, so I didn't have a problem with helping them out, especially with them being a church that I knew. Once I read the grant, I knew that there was a need for education around grant writing. So whether you write the grant yourself or you hire someone, you should know what the sections are. And the reason why I say that is because when I read the need statement that the grant writer had written, the need statement was basically about the church's need for playground equipment and the church's need for other materials for their daycare center. Now, when I talk to you about the need statement, you're going to see why that wasn't a good proposal. In order for you to understand what the need statement is, I have created a little exercise. You are the funder of a startup after school program. You developed your organization because there were no after school programs in your community. You visit with an elementary school principal to discuss the potential to advertise to their parents. During your meeting, you learned that the school has just recently secured grant funding to offer after school care. How do you respond? If you would like, you can take time now to pause the video and develop your response. Let's talk about the best way to respond to this particular scenario. First, you would continue discussing the program with that individual because by discussing the program, you will learn a little bit more about what they're doing. Their program is for tutoring in math because the students have such low test scores. When you discuss your program, the principal will learn that your program is about self esteem and awareness. And what you find is that you're doing two different things, but the school can benefit from both of them. So, what you do is continue the conversation with the principal and see how you can partner to fill the gaps. The needs statement is a lengthy process, but it is extremely important to starting your nonprofit. The needs statement is not the needs of your organization, but the needs of the community. What funders want to see when they read your needs statement is that you have thoroughly researched the needs of the communities. And I will tell you that a lot of funders, they already know what the needs are. They get several grant applications in. They also have a dedicated staff person. Some of them do, but they'll have a dedicated staff person that goes out to partner and discuss trends in that particular area. So if you do not do the research, funders will know, and then you won't get funded. In the need statement, you will use census data, or you may decide to conduct a focus group because it's a lot easier to do that instead of doing one on one interviews with the program directors. It's whatever your preference is. Find out what it is that they're offering and how you can offer something to complement that. Funders are extremely leery of is organizations that are going to duplicate services. May ask you are what programs are in the area that's doing something similar and how will yours be different? They really want to know if you did your research. Another great thing to do is research initiatives. A lot of times, your city or your county may have some initiatives where they are trying to mitigate a challenge in the community. You want to try to be a part of that as much as possible. That provides strength to your proposal. Keep it simple. Grants, as well as the need statement, should be written at no more than a ninth or 10th grade level. You don't want reader fatigue. You don't want the reader to read your grant proposal and just immediately be confused. So you want to keep it simple as possible. Write, and rewrite. That's all I say. Write, and rewrite. You also want to talk about your target population. Who are you targeting? What are their ages? What do they have a disability? Talk a little bit about your target population. Use quotes. You can use quotes from the interviews. You can use quotes from things that you research on the internet. Use quotes, use stories. It's a great idea to put that in this section. Always related to your mission. And one great thing is to make the reader cry. You want to ensure that your need statement clearly identifies a need. If you talk about all the wonderful and great things that are going on in your community, in your school, in your nonprofit organization, then there's no need for you to get any money. You're doing great things. So you need to make the reader cry. Here I will show you an example of a need statement. 2 out of 5 students at Clarksville High School are parents before the age of 15. In 2016, the Department of Education reported that over 60% of the students were economically disadvantaged and 80% were minorities. According to the Clarksville County Sheriff's Office, the crime rate is the third highest in the state. In the spring of this year, our organization surveyed 300 high school parents. The survey revealed that 85% of the households were single parents that worked in the evening hours. Clarksville High School parents desperately need after school care, but they are unable to afford these services. Although this statement is fictional, It shows you how to write a simple and concise need statement. The need statement should be no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs, and especially for the grants that we're writing, which are the foundation proposals. But a need statement should be no more than 2 or 3 paragraphs, and they clearly identify the point. The next component we will talk about is the organizational capacity. This is that SWOT analysis where you talk about your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What I've done here is I have created a little exercise for you to go through and find out what those strengths and weaknesses are for your organization. There is also a worksheet provided in this course. You can also find that same worksheet in the book, um, and that book is located on my website, www.renee.life. So let's take a look at this exercise. Your strengths. You want to talk about your strengths in the proposal when they ask you to describe your organizational capacity. A great example of that is talking about I am starting an after school program and I am a retired school teacher that has over 30 years of experience. You want to play that up, especially if you're a new nonprofit organization that has only been formed maybe a couple of months. You want to talk more about the experience of the board, of yourself, of the programs that you've been conducting for free. You definitely want to talk about that in your statement. The next thing you will discuss is your weaknesses. Funders will be able to tell that your organization has only been formed within the past 6 months. So you want to talk about that and let them know that although our organization is only 6 months old, I have XYZ experience, etc. So you want to use your strengths to play up those weaknesses. Some example of those weaknesses could be your years in existence, your number of staff, the minimal funds that you have. Opportunities. Great examples of opportunities are your ability to solicit grant funds. Maybe you have a grant writer that's on your board, your volunteers that you have. Maybe you work at a company that has access to thousands of employees who have already committed to help you with your endeavor, your social capital. You want to talk about the opportunities that you have available to your organization so that the funder will feel more confident in giving you these funds because they know that you will be able to continue the programs and services. A few threats that you may want to mention are around transportation. Maybe you have great programs, but the participants do not have available transportation. So you want to talk about how you can get around those challenges. Also, low participation, changes in funding. You want to talk about your capacity to handle some of these threats. It works hand in hand with your needs statement because you're talking about the needs of your organization. But in the organizational capacity statement, you want them to feel confident that your organization has the ability to mitigate any challenges that it comes across and also continue the programs. Now let's look at an example of a capacity statement. Again, just like your needs statement, your capacity statement should be no more than 3 to 4 paragraphs, if that. In this capacity statement, it's about a fictional organization called Educate Together. Educate Together's mission is simple: to help disadvantaged students succeed in school and in life. Although the organization has only been in existence for 2 years, the founders have over 50 years of experience educating at risk students. In 2018, Educate Together was offered $50,000 in funding from the Dell Foundation to provide after school tutoring to 100 low performing students. Unfortunately, this is not enough funding to support the overwhelming needs of our community. As you can see, this particular organization talks about their strengths. They also talked about the weaknesses with this funding not being enough to support the large needs of the students at the school. So, this is a great example of a simple capacity statement. The next component we will discuss is developing the program design. And a lot of organizations are excited to develop this part because this is where you talk about what your organization is going to do to meet that need. The program design, of course, is the longest part of your proposal. Although it is the longest part of the proposal, it also should be no more than 6 to 7 paragraphs. You're going to talk a little bit about the partners that you will work with to make sure this program happens. You may talk about your volunteers, especially if you're doing a mentoring program. You also want to include a timeline, and you also want to discuss your evidence based program component. Now, I will talk a little bit more about evidence based programs because this is how you will be set apart. Funders love evidence based programs, a program that has been researched and proven to be effective. When you use components of an evidence based program, what you're doing is telling that funder that you are doing something, your program is doing something that has worked in the past, so you know for a fact it's going to work in your particular community. It's extremely important to mention at least one part of your program that's evidence based. A lot of you may not know that your programs are evidence based, so we will talk about how to look at that. Goals and objectives. This is where you will show what your goals are for each program, what your objectives are, what you hope to accomplish, and we will discuss that a little bit later. You will talk a little bit more about your target population. How will you recruit them? If you're offering an after school program, what are the age groups? Be very aware of the number of programs that you can realistically do with the amount of staff and time that you have available. And last but not least, you definitely want to review similar programs online. I tell everyone that there is nothing new under the sun. And although you may have an innovative component to your program, there are some similar programs online. There are similar programs online that could give you the information that you need and maybe even help to guide you in the development of your program design. In this slide, I would like to go into a little bit more details about that evidence-based component that we discussed. Again, evidence-based programming models is extremely important to set your application apart from someone else's. To find the evidence-based components of your program, all you have to do is type in evidence-based and the name of the program. In this example, I typed in evidence based mentoring program. There is the Center for Evidence Based Mentoring, and there are several resources with all of the elements you need to write your program design. Again, there's nothing new under the sun. Use that and write in that section that this program is proven to work. All right, we're still in the program and design section. And I want to pause right here just to let you know that there is an example grant proposal on my website. So if you purchase this course, you will have access to that sample grant proposal because I know sometimes it's a little overwhelming just to learn about this. Some people have to also see how it fits together, and I do have that for you. All right, continuing with the program design, we're going to talk about the goals and objectives. Your goals and objectives should be SMART goals, which is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. What I would like to do now is play a short video to give you more information on how to develop those SMART goals and objectives.
Now, you've probably already thought quite a bit about what goals you have for your programs and what objectives you might have for your programs as well. But you might not be familiar with the SMART objectives approach, which is a particular method for writing program objectives that can drastically increase the likelihood that you're going to reach the objectives that you set to reach. And the reason why it works so well is that it forces you to take a step back to make sure that your goals are specific enough, that they're measurable, that they're achievable and agreed upon by your stakeholders, that they're realistic, and that they're time bound. Let's talk about this a little bit more. Specific. Objectives in a program should be very well defined before the program even starts, and so specific that you can tell me exactly who is going to achieve what with your program and by what time. And we'll talk about this more. Objectives should also be measurable. We should know if the goal is obtainable. We should know how far away from completion we are to our goal. And we should also know the metrics that we are going to use so that we can measure whether or not our goal was achieved. Let's talk about goals being achievable. One way to make sure that our goals are going to be achievable is to be sure that before we define our objectives and goals, that they're in agreement with what our stakeholders also want from our program. This is a really important first step that needs to happen before you can define the objectives for your program. Making sure that your objectives are realistic is also very important. In other words, can your objectives be reached with the resources and the knowledge and the time that's available to you and your team? And lastly, your objectives should be time bound, meaning that we need to allow enough time to achieve the goal, but we also need to think about the fact that we might have different goals and objectives for our programs at different times. We'll talk about this more later, but you might have goals that are different for your program at 1 month out versus 3 months out, or 2 years out, or even 5 years from the beginning of your program. How can you get started with writing SMART objectives? Well, the way to get started is by asking yourself 4 key questions. What are you looking to have happen from your program? In other words, what do you want to change as a result of your program? Who do you want to experience the change? That's really thinking about defining your target audience. How much do you want them to change? And by when do you want this change to occur? Asking these 4 key questions can help you make sure that your objectives are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Here's an example. By 2020, it's a very specific time, teen drivers over 16 years old in Philadelphia, now we've got our specific who or our target audience, will have a 15% decrease in crashes caused by distracted driving. In other words, this is something that's measurable, 15% decrease. It's achievable. We're not looking to decrease by 85% by 2020, but 15%, which is a much more realistic and achievable goal, right? And perhaps it's more realistic because it allows us some time to also get this done. Another way to make sure that the objectives that you're writing are SMART is to start asking yourself SMART questions. So, for example, is the outcome that you are developing or the outcome that you're looking to achieve with your program, are you using action-oriented words like you're looking to conduct something or develop or build or plan or execute something? Who is going to be involved? And did you get their input in the process? Are there actions that are going to be assigned to particular groups or people? And how is this outcome going to lead to the desired results? It's important to be as specific as possible when answering all of these questions. Let's think about being measurable. How are you going to know that your change has occurred? In other words, what metrics can you use to determine whether or not you've reached the objective that you wanted to reach? You can learn more about metrics and how to collect and use data to measure your outcomes by watching the videos for chapter 3, 12, and 13. And how are you going to collect this information? Again, those chapters will help you with these questions. To make sure that your objectives are achievable, you want to ask yourself if it can be done in the proposed time frame, whether or not there are limitations or constraints that are well understood by you and your stakeholders, and whether or not you can achieve these results with the resources that you already have in place, or perhaps are there other resources that you would need to be able to obtain first before you can move on with your program. And thinking about these resources is also going to help you figure out whether or not it's realistic for you to approach these objectives at this time, and whether or not it's really possible to achieve the outcome that you're looking for. You might want to also ask yourself, what is the baseline for my population and what are their priorities? And to make sure that you're time bound, over what time frame do you want this outcome or this need, when does this need to be achieved? And this might differ based on where you are in your program and your program development. The next thing to think about is how to make sure you're defining objectives that are within your reach. We would all like to reduce crash rates, but this is not the type of thing that's going to happen right away. So sometimes we start out with objectives that are too long term, and to make sure that we're instead defining objectives that are within our reach, we need to break them down. Here's an example. We might have short-term outcomes or objectives for our programs. So these might be outcomes that are reachable within about a 1 to 3 year period. These outcomes typically focus on changing individuals' knowledge or awareness or attitudes or behavioral intentions. For example, increased awareness of the risks associated with not wearing a seatbelt. Now that's an objective that can definitely be reached in a 1 to 3 year period. But let's think a little bit bigger. Say we had 4 to 6 years that we were thinking about. In that case, we might want to think about the intermediate term outcomes. Intermediate term outcomes typically focus on changes in individuals' skills and behaviors, like increasing seatbelt use among teen drivers. Of course, big picture, we can also think about long-term outcomes. Long-term outcomes typically take place over a 7 to 10 year period. And long-term, we might be hoping to decrease morbidity, mortality, and increase quality of life in our given target population. So for example, reducing crash and injury rates among teen drivers. Another way to make sure that you're defining SMART goals and objectives versus just overall goals for a program is to be very clear about the difference between a goal and an objective. A goal is simply a broad statement or a long-term expectation that we have about what we want to have happen as a result of our program. It's the foundation for our objectives. But our objectives describe the exact results that we want to achieve and how we are going to achieve them. And sometimes we need multiple objectives to reach our goal. Here's an example of the difference between a goal and an objective. So our program goal might be that we want to reduce teen driver crash rates. But for that goal, we could have numerous SMART objectives. Here are 2 for you to consider. By 2020, teen drivers over 16 years old in Philadelphia will have a 15% decrease in texting and driving. And at the end of the program, at least 75% of students will acknowledge that distracted driving is dangerous. These are examples of realistic, short or intermediate term objectives or outcomes that are measurable, specific, time-bound, and realistic. And these can help us to achieve our program goal of reducing teen driver crash rates.
I hope you enjoyed that last video. A lot of the funders now are moving to the online application. And so sometimes they will ask you, what are your goals and objectives? But other funders may ask you, what are your long-term goals? What are your short-term goals? So it's always great to keep this video so that you can have a refresher. Now we will move on to the timeline. We are still in the program design section, but I wanted to provide an example of what a timeline could look like in your particular grant proposal. It's very simple. It's just a table where you will have activities on one side and the timeline milestones on the other side. For example, in this table, we talked about meet with the program partners to complete the kickoff, and the milestone is as soon as you get the grant. The next is to hire your program staff in month 1, purchase supplies and materials month 1, recruit participants month 1 and 2, or months 1 and 2. So I won't go through each section of this, but it gives you a better idea of what your timeline could look like. Of course, your activities will be different based on what your program is. With the funders using those online templates, sometimes you may not have the luxury of being able to place it in a simple table format. So you'll have to get a little bit creative, maybe using bullet points or spaces. But no matter what type of format you use, this is the type of information you will use for your timeline. Now we are finally out of developing the program design section and moving on to my favorite part of the grant, and that is the budget. When offering this course in person, I came to realize that there are a lot of individuals who do not understand how to create a budget. This template allows you to create a budget first by program. So this is not your organizational budget, this is your program budget. If you're offering a mentoring program, but you also have a separate program component where you have someone else that goes around and provides confidence building classes in groups, it is best to do a template for each one. In this particular template, we will break down the cost of a mentoring program. In the first section of the template, you want to put the year. Then, of course, it would be a great idea to add your program name. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. As you can see, I just wrote mentoring. The target population for this program is African American and Latino boys. Organizations involved is the school district. And we will move on to section 2 because until we do those other sections, we will not know the total cost. In section 2, we're going to identify our current investment. In this example, there is a personal investment of $5,000 that the founder, of course, is putting in, and the type of investment is cash. There are no other investments, there are no other grants or fundraisers going on, and therefore the total amount of our current funding for the program is $5,000. Now we will move to section 3, where we talk about the potential funding sources that are available. This example, there is a made-up foundation called the Pete Foundation Grant, and we have identified that we can get $30,000 from that particular grant, and we're going to use that money for a program manager. The person responsible for making sure this happens is, of course, the founder, who is also writing the grants, and of course, that will be you. We have identified that there is $5,000 needed in funding for incentives and graduation. And we have identified that the annual pancake breakfast that we do for the organization will take care of that. And then we need general operating money to cover background checks, and that is from board contributions. Now, it may be easier for you to focus on the funding needed section first and then the staff and materials required, and then decide where that money is going to come from later. For example, just think about what you will need to implement a mentoring program. Of course, you're going to need a program manager who is going to find your volunteers, maybe teach your volunteers and run the entire program. In the beginning, that may be you, or you may be working full time, so you will hire someone. So you would identify how much that is. Then you would think, okay, we're going to need incentives, we will need background checks. So it may be a good idea to just write down what types of things you will need and how much that will cost, and then go back in and fill out who's going to be responsible and where you can get that money from. In Section 4, what you will do is total up the potential funding sources in Section 3, and you get that total is $37,000. This is the total amount that is unfunded. In the box next to that, you may also list your non cash needs. Maybe you just need a free space so that you can hold your graduation. So, add that non cash need. This is also called in kind donations. You will add that to that section. At the top in the total cost, you will add the total unfunded cost. That's the cost that you do not have, and also the $5,000 that you contribute each year. So the total cost of your mentoring program will be $42,000. And again, you will do this for each program that you have so that you can add it up to create your organizational budget. On this slide, I have an example of an annual program budget. As you can see, the revenue is listed in the top portion of the budget. Maybe you're charging fees for services. That could be after school program fees, whatever those fees may be, fundraisers or events, whatever grants you may have. That is what you would list in the top section. In the top section, it is also categorized by where this funding is going. This is extremely helpful when you receive a grant that is specifically for one or two programs. At the bottom, we have the expenses, our salaries, our legal, our accounting, and our total expenses for the entire budget are below. Now, the next component that we will go over is the sustainability plan. The sustainability plan is just as important as your program design. What you're communicating to your funder is how you plan to support your project in the future. As you can see, the components of a sustainability plan may include your fees for service, your membership dues. You're going to continue to solicit grant funding, fundraisers. Maybe you have a thrift shop, or you have corporate funders like ExxonMobil or something like that. And here is a sample sustainability plan written to give you an idea of what it would look like. With support from the San Francisco Foundation, Promise Inc. was able to hire a fundraising consultant who is working with our board of directors to develop and implement a strategic fundraising plan that will incorporate and expand annual giving programs. Building a larger individual donor base will complement PBD's successful grant seeking program and help ensure our financial future. PBD currently has 5 grant proposals pending, and we're requesting a total of $50,000. The next component we will discuss are your attachments. These are your supporting documents. A few of the things that may be requested are your 501c3. So please keep a copy of that available. I strongly suggest taking all of these documents and keeping it in one file, and that way you will always have it readily available when you're doing your proposal. Your articles of incorporation, those are the articles of incorporation that you received from the Secretary of State, an annual budget, program budget, audited financials. As a new organization, you may not have audited financials. Include a statement saying that you are a new organization and you do not have audited financials, but you plan to get them within the next 3 to 5 years. Your Form 990, that is your tax form that's done every year. Board of directors, they may ask for a list of the board of directors, and some funders may also want to know who your board of directors are affiliated with. And what that means is what are their occupations or what organizations are they affiliated with. A few funders, but not many, may ask for the research that you use if you quoted any research, your W 9 form. Those particular funders are great because you won't receive a notification. You just open your mailbox and there's a check in the mail. And there may be a spot for you also to add brochures.